second missionary journey? Second missionary journey? Okay, here we go. Just for the sake of Juliet and Alex, because they're dying to know about the second missionary journey. Right? It ends. So Paul gets this. Let's start with the Macedonian vision. The call from the man from Macedonia. That vision happened when Paul was in the city of Troas. All right. And then he gets this vision of this man from Macedonia, which is modern day Greece, saying, come help us. And so Paul and Silas and Luke and Timothy, the group, feels inspired and motivated and prompted by the Holy Spirit to take down their missionary journey from the modern day Turkey, Asia Minor, where Paul has been, and now he goes over into Greece, northern Greece, Macedonia. So the first city he visits in Macedonia and proclaims the gospel and all that, and there's converts and a church is planted, is the city of Philippi. Good job. And Silas is carrying the water. Philippi. And then we move on to the city of Thessalonica. We talked about that. And then we went to the city of Berea. And we talked about that. And those people were awesome because they studied, they were eager. Man, you can only hope for that audience in ministry. Mostly you give middle school knuckleheads who are screwing around. No, I'm just kidding. I'm just kidding. They're nice people. But sometimes they don't listen to your talk. Like last night. We went for ice cream to this place in Byron Center called Hausman's. It was really cool. We were having ice cream. And there's First Christian Reformed Church of Byron Center is just a block away. So we're standing in line for ice cream. And here comes the whole youth group from First CRC Byron Center. By the way, the youth pastor is a graduate of Kuiper College. A guy named Josh Knassen. Oh, I know Josh. Yeah. And he married Susan Berman. He married up. I'm just saying.
That's different from First Byron CRC, right?
No, that is First Byron CRC.
They're right next to each other.
They're kind of right. First Reformed and First CRC, they're kind of right next to each other.
With David Murray? That one? First Byron?
Yeah.
Oh,
yeah.
okay.
Yeah. First CRC in Byron Center. So Josh Knassen brings this whole youth group. He says, it was warm. It was 80 degrees. He only told me this. He said, I was going to talk about the wide gate and the narrow gate. And I started, and it just didn't seem like it was going so well. So we decided to go to Hausman's for ice cream. This happens in youth ministries. It's like, I'm tanking my talk, let's go get ice cream. The Bereans were noble, they listened to scripture. Okay, Philippi, Thessalonica, Berea. Athens, the great Athens, the city of learning and philosophy and Aristotle, Plato, and Socrates, and Paul contextualized the gospel and proclaimed the resurrection of Jesus, right? And in the Areopagus, the Supreme Court of Athens. And amazingly, well, most of it was negative. They mocked, they sneered about resurrection because Greek philosophy didn't have a concept for resurrection. Didn't have a category for that. And yet, one of the Supreme Court members believed. That's amazing. And then Paul goes to the city of Corinth. And so we're in Corinth now, and Paul's going to end up spending a year and a half in the city of Corinth. Now that's a good long time. That's much longer than he has so far spent in any one of these cities. But now he's going to get to Corinth, he's going to spend a year and a half. Okay, this is big. And so we introduced it, didn't we? What kind of city is Corinth?
Pagan.
Okay, pagan. Roman. The Roman gods, the Roman Caesar.
It's like a big crossroads. There's like a water crossroads and then like a land crossroads.
Okay, so it's a crossroads city with travel and trading, and it's one of the 5 largest cities in the world. And so you got a lot of people passing through, and of course, what really Corinth was known for?
Sexual immorality.
Sexual immorality. Are they fertilizing? Okay. Anyway, the temple of Apr13, the goddess of love, so known for sexual immorality. And so here comes Paul, and he's going to preach the gospel. He's going to plant a church. Remember, Paul comes to Corinth. He describes his mood. He says, I came in And just coming from Athens, he says, I came in fear and trembling. You know, so he's a little bit wary of how things are going to go out now in Corinth. I mean, after Athens and after he's gotten chased out of every other city he's been in, now he shows up in the most pagan, Roman, immoral, largest city in the world, and he wonders how stuff's going to go. He's scared. He says, I came in weakness. And what we're going to see along the way is how God comes alongside and encourages Paul and turns that weakness into strength. That's the message of Corinth. Weakness becomes strength. Does that make sense? Okay, and then Joe.
I was just thinking about this. You had mentioned like he came in fear and in trembling because of his previous experiences.
I think that's part of it, yeah.
Yeah. 1 Peter 3:15 says, give an answer to every man that asketh you a reason of the hope that is in you with meekness and fear. So that's kind of like, that sort of like categorizes like how we should always like do our evangelism with meekness and fear.
It is. And we should always take a position of humility. And that's what I'm talking about. But I think Paul is describing in 1 Corinthians 1 his attitude, his demeanor, the effects of what these previous experiences have had on him, particularly in Athens, being kicked out in these cities and being imprisoned and beaten and put in the stocks and tortured. And he says, man, I came to this big metropolis of a New York City. And then he says, I resolved to preach only Christ and Him crucified and the resurrection. So I'm just going to get right to the core. So I think he, and we know that most of the people in Corinth who became followers of Jesus were slaves and weak and poor people. And Corinth was a wealthy city, but it was mostly the lower class and poor and weak people that were followed, and with one exception. The guy that we talked about at the end of, did I talk about him? His name is? No? Oh, he's big. He's cool. He's awesome. Okay, I'm going back. Go ahead, Bethany. Okay, no? Okay, thank you. Hey, Silas. Hey, everybody else. No, just kidding. Remember Erastus, everybody? Erastus? Oh, come on, this is my favorite. Remember the Erastus inscription? Oh, yeah. This is cool. The Erastus inscription. He's like the second in command. He's like the assistant to the mayor, Gallio, in Corinth. And this huge plaza, which was the entryway to the theater in Corinth, stones were laid, and here's the Erastus inscription, which they found, and it dates to the 1st century in his name. Erastus for pro his idolship, which is his position. You know, his city clerk. He's the city clerk. For his idolship, SP, abbreviation, out of his own money, laid this stone. That's pretty cool, everybody. And then we have this stone and this wealthy guy, and then we have this evidence in the New Testament. Right? Erastus. Acts. 2 Timothy. Erastus. Romans. Erastus. Are you with me? And it's just pretty cool that this Erastus guy becomes a believer in Jesus. And so I think he's probably rather the exception. But nevertheless, he becomes a believer and very influential. And you know, what's going to end up in Corinth is that Paul is going to be defended by, and the gospel is going to be given free entree by the mayor himself, a guy named, we'll get to him. Since I think this was in the reading. Okay, Gallio. He's the mayor in Corinth. Are you with me? And he's going to come to the defense of Paul. And maybe, I don't know, maybe a relationship with Erastus. Hey, look, Erastus is a believer. He believes this stuff. I don't know. But we'll see. Everybody okay? So now we're all back caught up. Erastus. And here Paul says in 1 Corinthians, not many of you were wise by human standards. Not many were influential. Not many of noble birth. And that's true, right? Except for Erastus. He might have been the exception. Does that make sense? So that's the church in Corinth. All right, everybody okay? All right, awesome. So what's this? What's this right here? I just want to make sure I'm doing what I'm supposed to do. What is this? Well, just feel free to read. In Bema, this is the Bema. So what's a Bema? Every city, every Roman city especially, has a Bema in the city square, the Agora, which is where this Bema is located in Corinth. In the Agora. What's a Bema? What happens at the Bema? Okay? One thing that happens is judgment, right? So conviction. Like the mayor, the judge, the magistrate, whoever it is, can go to the Bema. A prisoner, a slave, a criminal, somebody who's been charged can appear before him, and that person can be convicted. And by the way, they can be beaten and flogged on the spot for such a conviction. Are you with me? Remember, Paul appeared before the Bema in Philippi. And the result of that was he got put in prison, which was a holding tank. He got flogged too, got put in prison, and was a holding tank for potentially a worse punishment. Maybe death, right? So judgment. Also, what happens from the Bema is the opposite, commendation. So it could be conviction or judgment, but it also could be commendation, like somebody's going to get a medal, or they're going to get they're going to get a promotion, and the mayor comes out in a public ceremony and gives a promotion. That's kind of cool, right? Although Paul probably doesn't think he's going to get a medal or a promotion from God. And then also the Bema was, because the word Bema literally means high place. So usually it was a raised place, so it was a place where the mayor could go and observe the Agora. So it was a place of observation, commendation, and conviction. And Paul's going to appear before the Bema and Gallio in the city of Corinth. Are you with me? So there's what you see. That's what's left of it in Corinth, and you can see the Bema. There it is. Right in the Agora, in the marketplace, and there's what's left of the Bema. And there it is. And you can see in the background, that's the Apr13. So up on the Apr13 is the Acropolis, the top part, where the temple of Apr13 was, and all of that. This is down below in the ancient Corinth, near the Agora. So you have the Bema. You also have an imperial temple. This is an imperial temple to the Caesar, to the Roman Caesar. So there's no doubt about who controls the city of Corinth, who is worshipped in the city of Corinth. Who? Well, Roman Caesar was God, right? So there's the imperial temple. Here's the imperial altar that goes along. So the imperial temple and this imperial altar that was found in Corinth. And you can't see the inscription. I'll zero in on it here. Here's the inscription on the altar in Corinth. So, can anybody, well, we've seen this so many times already. Anybody translate in the red box?
Divine Caesar, Son of God.
Okay, go ahead, Silas.
The divine Caesar, Son of God.
Yeah. So the imperial Caesar, the divine manifestation of God. So there's no doubt what's going on in Corinth, right? This is emperor worship, gods, all that. This is what Paul is up against. Are you with me? So you can see, doesn't this maybe add to the intimidation? I mean, I'm going downtown in New York City. I'm going to evangelize. I mean, I know. But it's intimidating, right? And you go to a place like that. So Caesar, the Roman Caesar, was actually, at the time that Paul was in Corinth, was actually engaging in a rebuilding project of Corinth. Was building it up, a lot of building projects and construction going on, and everything's happening. Imperial temples, altars, other things. All this is going on in Corinth in the first century, right? Because Corinth is a thriving, big metropolis of a city. And then Paul writes this in 1 Corinthians 3. Isn't this interesting? Don't you know that you yourselves are God's temple, and that God's Spirit dwells in your midst? You together are that temple. What's Paul saying there? In contrast to the building project, that the Roman Caesar is engaging in Corinth. And you can see it all around you with the temples and the gods and the temple of Apollo and the temple to Octavia and the imperial temple to the Caesar. In contrast to all that, God is, you finish the sentence. God is
Building a temple.
Dwells within the believers.
He dwells in believers. God is,
Building a temple.
God too is undergoing a construction project. And he's building a temple. Not a temple to Apollo. Not even a temple that's a building made out of brick and mortar, but he's building a temple out of people. And it's you guys. Wouldn't that be a cool thing to say in Corinth? In contrast to the building projects? I think so. All right. All right, everybody with me? Hang in there. So here we go. Paul comes in weakness. And we've all felt that in ministry, haven't we? Weakness, intimidation, inadequacy. You know, here I am. I don't know anybody. Have you ever shown up someplace where you didn't know anybody? And these guys show up and go, I don't know anybody. What's going to happen here? I got to do this thing. I've done that a lot. And, you know, Paul shows up in Corinth, doesn't know anybody. Here we go. Acts 18:1. Let's go back to the very beginning of the story. How is God going to encourage Paul? Watch this. After this, Paul left Athens and went to Corinth. There, he met a Jew named Aquila, a native of Pontus, who had recently come from Italy with his wife Priscilla. Because Claudius had ordered all the Jews to leave Rome, Paul went to see them, and because he was a tent maker as they were, get this, he stayed and worked with them. You guys, if you show up at a place, you don't know where you're going to stay, you don't know anybody, what's going to happen, and then you ever kind of run into somebody and you go, oh man, we went to the same high school. Oh, that's awesome. Really? That's my uncle. You know, and you kind of form a little thing, a bond, and you go, oh yeah, come on, let's have lunch. I'll sit with you at the lunch table. And all of a sudden you go, I feel better now. You ever have that? Yes, you have. Yes, you have. Of course you have. Like Alex and Juliet. I went to Juliet very kindly. It's like, I don't know any of these people. And it's like, maybe somebody will invite you lunch. But it's kind of cool. So what's the deal with Claudius? What is being described here? Priscilla and Aquila show up in Corinth because they got kicked out of Italy. What in the world is that? Which we actually know about. We actually know about. Before I put the next slide up, anybody know? Claudius. Okay, first of all, who's Claudius? Roman emperor. Roman emperor. Which, by the way, I just ran across this weekend as I was not reading your papers. And I'm procrastinating, looking for something else to do. Yeah, like you never do that. Yeah, right. Okay, I go to Netflix because I think I gotta have something for Netflix. And I got a couple hours here. I'm gonna do a Netflix thing, right? And so I run across Netflix, The Roman Empire. Do you know the Roman Empire? Have you been Netflix? The Roman Empire. So it's like 3 seasons, and it's got all these episodes of the Roman Empire. So I fast forwarded to the Ides of March. The episode, the Ides of March.
Yeah.
Just for Alex and Juliet.
Most famous murder.
The most famous murder in history. Murder of Julius Caesar by Brutus, who was really his friend. It was so cool. They showed this, and they showed Brutus and Julius Caesar. They were friends, and they were like on the same team, and they were doing this, and then kind of, you're going to be my son, you're going to be the next guy, and then Brutus goes into the Senate, and they're like going, no, Brutus, man, you got to do something with this guy. He's like making laws like a dictator, like a king. And then Brutus says, okay, gotta get rid of him, like his friend. He kills Julius Caesar. I'm watching it. It's really dramatic, and it's kind of a documentary because it's not just all that, but it is acted out. But the Roman Empire on Netflix. There you go. So I watched the Ides of March, and then like who's going to be the ruler next? And then what we talked about, the Battle of Philippi. Remember the Battle of Philippi? And this is where Octavian, who becomes Caesar Augustus, the adopted son of Julius Caesar, pairs up with Mark Antony, and they go against Brutus, who killed Julius Caesar, and Cassius at the plane of drama in Philippi, and Octavian and Mark Antony defeat Brutus and Cassius, and thereby the Roman Empire becomes an empire ruled by a dictator, king, and Caesar, rather than a representative republic. Right? This is huge. In the document, I know, I gotta move on with this, but in the documentary, they were saying that this guy, Julius Caesar, was one of the most brilliant political sort of minds of all time, and that this was one of the biggest sort of watershed moments in political world history. That Julius Caesar is a dictator, and then he gets murdered.
Which ironically accelerates the change.
Right.
Which ironically brings about the changes they were with less confidence.
Right. It was be careful what you wish for and all that. So, and that's the world that Paul goes into presenting the gospel. All right, anyway, I just read Roman Empire, it's pretty cool. Claudius is the Roman emperor. What did he do?
Ordered all the Jews to leave Rome.
Good job. Nice one. Did you look it up?
It was on the screen.
It was on the screen. Oh, you already know. Oh, yeah. It's in scripture. Yeah, so here's this guy. So Suetonius, he's a Roman historian, and he writes about this in the Lives of the 12 Caesars, which is simple to read. Since the Jews constantly made disturbances at the instigation of Chrestus, he expelled them from Rome. Now, there's a misunderstanding or a linguistic issue or something. Chrestus was sort of misunderstood for Christos, Christ. And so Claudius thinks he's expelling all the Christians from Rome. And he did, right? That he's going to expel the Christ people from Rome. And he did, including Priscilla and Aquila, and they end up in Corinth. And that's how providentially they meet Paul. Isn't that cool? And that's how they got together. All right. Everybody good? All right. So the other thing about Corinth is that they had the Isthmian Games. So do you know about the Olympic Games, right? And that started in Greece, right? Mount Olympus and all of that. And then, but they had other games. The Olympics was every 4 years. But then they also had the Pythian Games. Where did those happen? In this beautiful stadium, most well-preserved ancient stadium, by the way, that's still visible. The Pythian Games.
Coliseum.
Okay, no. Pythian. Python. It's okay. Delphi. Remember Delphi and the Pythos and the Pythian priests? So the Pythian Games, they also had, by the 90s, the Domitian Games. Because Domitian was the Roman emperor in the 90s AD. Those happened in Ephesus. So the Olympics, the Pythian Games, the Domitian Games, and then also the Isthmian Games. So there were Olympic Games and athletic competitions, which, by the way, also included competitions in music and art. They had an art prize in Corinth. Art prize. We had this thing in Grand Rapids. It's called Art Prize. And all these people do it. Art, and many people look at them in restaurants, make a lot of money. And so they had an art prize and a music competition and athletic games. And so Rome, that will really, from Greece, from Rome, it gave birth to winners and losers. Right? Winners and losers and competition and all that kind of thing. And again, the gospel is going to be just in direct sort of opposition to that, isn't it? So every 2 years, well, I guess every 2 years, in the second and fourth Olympiad at Corinth, in honor of Poseidon, the prize was dry celery wreath. Not a really attractive prize, but you got it. Later pine, not as prestigious as the Olympics.
Have they ever been called the Corinthian Games?
No, I don't think so. I think the Isthmian Games, because remember Corinth was located on the Isthmus. So here's the thing. Well, here's I know this doesn't look like much, but in Corinth, out on that isthmus, they found what they thought was sort of part of the athletic competition and track. I know it doesn't look like much, but that they identified where these athletic games were taking place and all that. Isn't it interesting that what's Paul's sort of occupation? He's bivocational. He's bivocational. What's his occupation? He's a tent maker. He's a tent maker. All these people coming to the Isthmian Games are going to need tents. Oh. I'm just saying. And we go, Paul, oh yeah, but I got a good deal on a tent. You need a tent? Oh, the games are great. Yeah, I'll get you a tent. It's beautiful. Your whole family can fit in it. It'll protect you from the elements. And by the way, you know, God brought me here really to proclaim the good news of this guy named Jesus Christ. This is how bivocational works, everybody. Which is pretty cool. And so Paul's a tent maker in Corinth and the Isthmian Games of Corinth. I don't know. And then this is what he talks about in 1 Corinthians 9. Do you not know that in a race all the runners run, but only one gets the prize? What's he thinking about? Well, the Isthmian Games, of course. Run then as a Christian and a disciple of Jesus in such a way to get the prize. Everyone who competes in the game goes into strict training. He's comparing discipleship with Jesus to athletic training, which is really good, right? Isn't it cool, like the way you train your body and train your stuff? I mean, and then have you ever thought about spiritual training as a disciple of Jesus in the same way that you train for athletic competition? Maybe not, right? But athletic competition just requires a lot of training. And Paul says, run, do it to get a crown. They do it to get a crown that will not last. A bunch of celery stalks. But we do it to get a crown that will last forever. Therefore, I do not run like someone running aimlessly. I do not fight like a boxer beating the air. No, I strike a blow to my body and I make it my slave so that after I have preached to others, I myself will not be disqualified for the prize. And that's the background to Paul of Corinth. Does that make sense? I think it's pretty cool. Okay. Oh, there's the wreath. That's supposed to be the wreath. They found this sculpture, and that's supposed to be the wreath that you win for winning one of the competitions and so on. And there it is. The modern recreation of the victory wreaths. On the left is the pine wreath, the winner of the event at the Missionary Games, and on the right is a laurel wreath for the winner of the Olympic Games. So these crowns for the winners, right? Paul compares. That's pretty cool. Everybody okay? Okay, so Paul's in Corinth. I think the first piece of encouragement that God gives to Paul in weakness is what? He gets accepted and received and shown hospitality by Priscilla and Aquila. They're tent makers. Paul's a tent maker. Hey, hang with us, live with us. You can crash on the couch and you can help us with the tents. And we're Christians too. Isn't that right? Isn't that cool? Okay. Verse 4. Every Sabbath, Paul what? What's our word? Dialogomai. We've seen this before many times. He dialogomai in the synagogue, trying to persuade the Jews and Greeks. So dialogomai, again, is the discussion, the answering objections, the giving a reasoned, evidence-filled talk. And then pytho is what? To persuade. This isn't just a discussion. This isn't just mutual edification for the fun of it. But this is to persuade you to faith in Jesus. And that's what we do when we present the gospel. That's what Paul did. Everybody good? Okay, cool. Okay, so the next thing, this is Corinth. So right here's the Agora, the marketplace. The Bema is right here, the Agora. Right? The Temple of Apollo is the main thing right here. Right? The Temple of Octavia, the sister of Octavian, Caesar Augustus. The Odeon, which is the City Hall, right? The theater, right? And the plaza and the Erastus Stone. Are you all with me? So this is Corinth, and here we go. So the one thing I want to highlight here is the thing called the Lection Road. This is the Lection Road right here. Lection was one of the two port cities of Corinth, right? The isthmus on either side was a port, right? Lection was one side. The other side was Cenchrea. Cenchrea was the place that Paul stayed for 3 months when he wrote to the Romans. The end of the third journey. So this Lucknow Road leads out to one of the port cities. So that's why they call it that. But this is a road, and at the end of the road, what archaeologists discovered was a Jewish synagogue. The synagogue, where Paul would have preached, and Paul would have reasoned in dialogomai. They discovered a synagogue and an inscription at that synagogue. So here it is. This is it's kind of a lintel, kind of a, maybe a, kind of a, well, what's a lintel? Kind of an inscription as part of your doorway or your roof, or one of the supporting stones in that, which gives the title. But you can see here, this is in Hebrew, and it says Synagogue of the Hebrews. Come on, that's pretty cool. And it was right here. They found it. Now, just to clarify, this inscription was actually found among the remains of a 3rd or 4th century AD synagogue. But what the Jews tended to do was to build their later synagogues on the foundation of the earlier ones. And this is a huge stone. And this probably would have been used again or secondarily in that later synagogue. That's the idea. And so that the synagogue that Paul would have preached at is right here. I think another piece of encouragement for Paul, he shows up at a synagogue where there are already God-fearers, where there are already Jews who know the scriptures. Are you with me? And he's being encouraged in that place. So that's good. That's another piece of encouragement. And here's another part of that synagogue, what they found, obviously, the menorahs. The 3 menorahs on that synagogue in Corinth. That was pretty cool. So going on, in Acts 18, when Silas and Timothy came from Macedonia, Paul devoted himself exclusively to testifying to the Jews. Testifying, making a serious declaration or argument that Jesus was the Messiah. But when they opposed Paul and became abusive, so the Jews become abusive, right? He shook his clothes in protest and said to them, "Your blood be on your own head. I'm innocent of it. From now on, I'm going to the Gentiles." Testifying. That's this word right here. The Greek word, 9 times in Acts. It's to warn, to give a serious declaration. So Paul's in the synagogue, warning them, giving a serious declaration that Jesus is the Jewish Messiah. And the Jews ultimately oppose Paul and abuse him. And so what does Paul do? He goes, right? He goes. And he goes to a more Gentile secular place, and we'll find out where that is. I'm going to the Gentiles. Then Paul left the synagogue, went next door to the house of Titius Justus, a worshiper of God. So a Gentile who's a God-fearer, right? Crispus, the synagogue leader, and his entire household believed in the Lord. And many of the Corinthians who heard Paul believed and were baptized. All right, how do you think Paul's attitude is changing now? Priscilla and Aquila. All right, synagogue. All right, the synagogue leader. Now the synagogue leader, these synagogues everywhere, in Galilee, everywhere, they did not have a pastor. Synagogues did not have a rabbi. Synagogues had what's called a chazan. A chazan. That is a caretaker. Kind of the synagogue caretaker. He's the leader, the caretaker. He's the one who's the upkeep and all that stuff. He's not the pastor. He's not the rabbi. But he's in charge of the synagogue in Corinth at this place. And a guy named Crispus, and he becomes a believer in Jesus. That's encouraging, isn't it? As did many other Corinthians who heard Paul. That's got to be encouraging. The little community is growing. Fear not, Paul. The community is growing. Remember Elijah? Remember Elijah in the Old Testament after the prophets of Baal thing in 1 Kings 19? Remember that, 18 and 19? Remember? What did Elijah think?
He's the only one.
I'm the only one. And what did God say to him?
He's got his 7,000.
You're not the only one. There's 7,000 who haven't bowed their knees to Baal. And I think that's what God's doing to Paul. Paul says, I'm the only one. I just came from Athens. I'm the only one. And God says, no, you're not. Crispus, the synagogue leader, and many of these Greeks are being baptized. There are 7,000 who haven't bowed. I think that's an encouragement in ministry. To meet somebody who shows hospitality. To be at a synagogue where people already have a morality of belief in God. And then to see these converts in ministry, that's encouraging. And that's what's happening. Keep going. On one night, how do you like this? How do you like this in ministry? Wouldn't this be great? On one night, the Lord spoke to Paul in a vision. Do not be afraid. Keep on speaking. Do not be silent. For I am with you, and no one else is going to attack and harm you, because I have many people in this city. So Paul stayed in Corinth for 1.5 years, teaching them the Word of God. How nice is that? God puts a note under your pillow. Don't be afraid. Go to work, man. Go teach the middle school youth group. Give them your talk. Unleash the talk. Right? Because they're going to listen. And there's going to be kids whose lives are changed. How would you like that in ministry? Because there are some days, I'm honest, there are some days in ministry you go and you go, I don't know. And I don't know. Is anybody listening? Anybody care? I mean, is any of this doing any good? You just kind of go home and go, I don't know. That's why I like mowing the lawn. Because you can see what you did. Right? Isn't mowing the lawn really cool? I mean, the fresh mown grass, the longer. Then after you mow the lawn, you go, man, my yard looking good. And you see what you did. In ministry, you can never see what you did. You never really do. You know what I mean? You go do ministry, you pour your heart into it, you preach the gospel, you invite people to Christ, and so doesn't really, you don't know. That's why Paul tells Timothy, you got to be faithful. Keep going. Fight the fight. Keep the faith. Proclaim the gospel. Right? And so I think it's pretty cool that God shows up and gives him a little vision. Like, hey, Paul, it's all right, man. I'm already at work in these people's hearts. I'm already going before you and preparing the way. You keep going, because there's lots of people. You are going to have so many baptisms. How about that? You're a pastor, you go, man, you're going to have like 200 baptisms this year. You go, all right, I'm in. I'll work for free on that. Right? And somebody told me that. Right? And Paul's going, I'm encouraged. So I think be encouraged. All right, everybody okay? There's more encouragement. So we get to verse 12. When Gallio, the proconsul of Achaia, so Achaia is southern Greece, Macedonia is northern Greece, Achaia is southern Greece. The capital of Macedonia is the city of, Thessaloniki. All right, got it, good job. The capital of Achaia, southern Greece, is Corinth. And that's where Gallio is. The proconsul of Achaia. The Jews of Corinth made it a united attack on Paul and brought him to the place of judgment, the Bema. This man, they charge, is persuading the people to worship God in ways contrary to our Torah. So, who brings charges against Paul? The Jews. The Jews drag Paul before Gallio in the Agora, and they say, hey, Mr. Mayor, this guy is screwing with our Torah. And he's teaching stuff like this guy named Jesus is Messiah, and he's the fulfillment of all. And he's teaching us to worship God in ways contrary to the Torah. And they bring him before Gallio, the secular Roman appointed judge and mayor in Corinth. Paul's in trouble, isn't he? But not quite. Oh, this is cool. The Gallio inscription. So this is one of those things, with the Erastus inscription, when you find stuff in archaeology that confirms the historicity of Scripture, cool, Erastus, Gallio. So they found this Gallio inscription, actually they found it at Delphi. It's in Delphi. They found it in Delphi, but it has Gallio's name. There's Gallio. From 51 to 52 AD, just exactly when Paul was in Corinth. Gallio. Come on, you guys. a guy named Gallio, who we have an inscription, who was the proconsul of Achaia, was in Corinth in 52 AD. Scripture, Acts 18 is right. That's pretty cool. And there's the proconsul in ancient Greece by the name of Gallio. The Greek inscription refers to Gallio, noted in the Bible. It was written in the 1st century AD. It was discovered at the Temple of Apollo in Delphi. Remember? In 1905, it originally consisted of various fragments that were pieced together in 1967. The artifact is now in the Delphi Museum in Greece. One of the cool things, I got to see this thing in person in Delphi last June. It was like the Gallio inscription. Dude, you were there. Paul appeared before you. I know it's just your name on a piece of stone, but Paul appeared before you. And that just was cool. Right? While Gallio was proconsul of Achaia, the Jews made this united attack. I'll give you that. There's the Bema. There's the Bema. Just as Paul was about to speak, Gallio said to them, if you Jews were making a complaint about some misdemeanor or serious crime, it would be reasonable for me to listen to you. But since it involves questions about words and names in your own Torah, settle this matter yourself. I will not be judged of such things. How do you think Paul's feeling now? All right, and if Paul was discouraged before, he must feel like a lion now. You know what I mean? Thank you, God. Priscilla and Aquila, a place to live, fellow Christians to be encouraged by, a Jewish synagogue whose leader becomes a believer in Jesus, a bunch of other people baptized, a vision from Jesus himself. This is going to be many people in the city. And then the mayor himself dismisses the case against me and says, let it go. He done nothing wrong. Let him go. And opens the door for the gospel to keep going. Isn't that awesome? Way to go. And that's what happened. So he drove them off. Then the crowd there turned on Sosthenes, the next synagogue leader. Because Crispus became a believer. So the next guy is like a guy named Sosthenes. And they beat him in front of the proconsul, and Gallio showed no concern whatsoever. Because I don't love him. You shouldn't love something like that. When somebody gets the tar beat out of them. But it does kind of show you, right? The Jews bring this charge against Paul before Gallio. They have intentions to put him in prison, like we're right and you're wrong, Paul. And what happens? The whole thing turns on the Jews. And so then they come and they beat the heck out of Sosthenes because apparently he didn't defend Judaism as well as he should have. And he lost the case. And they beat him up. And Gallio looks at it and goes, oh well, them's the breaks. Have a nice day, everybody. I don't know exactly. I'm just paraphrasing what he says. And that's pretty cool. Paul gets. Right? I think this characterizes Paul's experience in Corinth, who through faith, the hall of fame of faith, through kingdoms administered justice, gained what was promised, shut the mouths of lions, quenched the fierce flames, escaped the edge of the sword, whose weakness was turned to strength. That's what happened in Corinth, isn't it? Paul comes in weakness, and the weakness of the Christian church in Corinth is turned to strength. That's pretty cool. Everybody okay? All right, and then again, God is building a temple out of people. One more thing in Corinth, then we're going to Ephesus because there's a cool thing, and we had to get to Ephesus. So one more thing in Corinth, and what you're looking at here doesn't look like much, but you're looking at the Asclepion at Corinth. So what's the Asclepion? And who is Asclepius? The god Asclepius, and the temples to Asclepius are called Asclepions. The god of medicine and healing. There's the hugest Asclepion. The Mayo Clinic. Mayo Clinic, everybody? It's this big thing in Minnesota. Is it Rochester, Minnesota? Yeah, big Mayo Clinic, right? When everybody, right, if you got a problem that no doctor can solve, oh, I'm going to go to the Mayo Clinic, right? The main Asclepion, the Mayo Clinic of that day was the Asclepion located in Pergamum. Pergamum was one of the 7 churches, right, in Asia Minor. There's a huge Asclepion in Pergamum where people would go and there were baths, there were mud baths, places to rest, read, sun, a theater, and the priests of Asclepius in Pergamum. We know this from Pergamum. It probably happened in all the places, but they would make these the patients who came there for healing walk through this long tunnel where the water was dripping. You hear the water, it's this eerie sound. And you're walking through the tunnel, and they're piping into the tunnel from the roof. They're piping in probably drugs like opium. So the patients, by the time they walk through this tunnel, are feeling high. Then they say, well, sit in the hot tub a while. Have something to drink. How do you think you'd be feeling? It's like,
good.
Thank you, Asclepius. Feeling good, man. Hey, lay down and take a nap. Go to the theater, sit in the sun, hang out by the pool. I'd be feeling pretty good too, right? It's all, by the way, it's all a bunch of hocus pocus, right? But this is what's going on in Corinth. So here's the Asclepion in Corinth. One of the things that they found there was all these clay body parts that are now in the museum in Corinth. Clay body parts that would be sold at the Asclepion in Corinth. So if you came there and you were ailing or some part of your body was hurting, you would purchase the body part that was hurting. And so they've discovered, arms and legs and fingers and brains, sexual organs, clay body parts that would be sold to the people that you would present to Asclepius at the Asclepion. Are you with me? And then you'd sometimes maybe even buy another one to take it home to thank Asclepius for healing your leg or your brain or whatever else. Are you with me? They found these. Keep this in mind. Just as the body, though one, has many parts, but all its parts form one body, so it is with Christ. So where does that come from? Well, it comes from all these body parts that were being bought and sold and taken, and playthings, and all these body parts. And Paul says, yeah, just like the body of Christ. I mean, you don't have to go to Asclepion. We are the body of Christ. When you put us all together and so on. Are y'all with me? Okay. I mean, a pagan city. A pagan, secular, Roman, imperial city live such good lives among the pagans that though they accuse you of doing wrong, they may see your good deeds and glorify God on the day He visits us. Right? And that's what Paul did. And that's what Priscilla and Aquila did. And that's what that little Christian community. Man, I admire Paul and his little band of followers and believers. Don't you? Who in weakness turned it into strength. And there was a church in Corinth. Now, albeit they were messed up, because they are deserving of 2 letters that Paul writes to them later, right? And they're messed up, right? And they need to be told about sexual morality. They need to be told about unity in the church. They need to be told about all kinds of buying meat in the marketplace, right? Can we buy meat in the marketplace, Paul? Remember Corinth? Remember what Paul said to that? Hey, Paul, can we buy the meat in the marketplace that's sacrificed to idols? Would that be okay? And Paul says, yeah, it's all right if you want to. That's cool. Because an idol, we all know that an idol isn't anything. So if you want to buy that meat, that's fine. But then in chapter 10, Paul says, don't you dare go sacrifice meat in the festivals to the gods. Because the festivals to Asclepius, the festivals to Dionysius, the god of wine, would involve orgies and gluttony and drinking and sexual morality. He says, don't you participate in that. If you want to eat the meat in the marketplace, that's fine. But don't you dare go participate in these other things. I would. So Paul has to write to them to figure out how to live the Christian life. What do we do? What can we not do? Right? And Paul's whatever you do, do it all for the glory of God. Right? Everybody good? We gotta do this. Can I do this? Is in the textbook. Application real fast, and then we're going to get at Ephesus. So, evangelism in immoral places. Okay? Sexual morality, temple of Aphrodite, where does Paul go? Right there, ground zero. He goes to ground zero for sexual morality, and he starts talking about the gospel, right? Sometimes I think, I don't know,